We're recording? Okay. Cool. Oh, let me turn this on. All right. You may have heard of a difference in Buddhist traditions between the Mahayana Buddhists and the Theravada Buddhists. That's one of the things I'm going to talk about today because the main topic today is the Mahayana movement, which is it's two things. First of all, in the first couple centuries of the Common Era, the centuries when the Roman Empire was at its peak, right after the time of Christ. So we're moving now from the first millennium BCE that we've been talking about up till now, and now we're going to be talking about the first millennium of the Common Era, the first 1,000 years of the last 2,000 years. So what happens at the beginning of that century, sort of the first to the third century, is that you have another sort of movement of renewal in Buddhism, another sort of cleansing and getting back to basic doctrines. And it is substantially philosophical. In fact, in the next video, we're going to look at the philosopher Nagarjuna, who is part of the Mahayana movement, identified closely with it. And we'll see that there's a substantial metaphysical discussion going on here. Today, I just want to give you the basics of what the difference is, what Mahayana sort of means, and a few interesting doctrinal points about it. And then at the end, I want to talk about the Heart Sutra. So we're going to have a nice little session of Buddhist philosophy here, I hope, if all goes well and the creeks don't rise. So let me go to my sharing. I'm going to do some sharing. Okay, sorry. Okay. Yeah, oh, there it is. Please, it's bad enough day already. Today's the day after election day, if that means anything. There we go. Okay. Mahayana Buddhism. And then, as I say, we'll just walk through a couple of verses of the Heart Sutra and sort of see what happens. Okay. So, as I said, I'll move this around. I don't know if that moves for you. So you're in the first century, time of the Roman Empire, and you get this a renewal, a movement of renewal and reform in Buddhism in India, northern India, Mahayana. So Mahayana, guys, I don't know if I finished saying this. It has two meanings. First, it refers to the specific period and these specific writings, the sutras, which are from the first couple of centuries of the Common Era. But we also refer to any branch of Buddhism that descends from this period and these philosophers in India as Mahayana Buddhism. And that includes pretty much most of what people nowadays are interested in. For example, then Tibetan Buddhism, which is what we'll end with, time permitting, Vajrayana Buddhism, is a branch of Mahayana Buddhism, as is Zen Buddhism in Japan and Chan Buddhism, Zen's parent Buddhism in China and classical Chinese thought. These are all branches of Mahayana. The Theravada just refers, as that third bullet point says there, to these other areas that got proselytized into Buddhism before this Mahayana movement, areas in the late first millennium when King Ashoka sent his people out. Remember, he sent them out across the Bay of Bengal and over to Indochina, and so Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Burma. These are Theravada Buddhist countries, as is Sri Lanka, which used to be Ceylon, the big island off the southeast coast of India, where the Sinhalese people, the majority of people in Sri Lanka, are Buddhists. These Buddhist governments and Buddhist societies behave much like other governments and societies. But I think the main thing that I would want to stress is that there really isn't really any big difference between Mahayana and Theravada. There were periods in the classical period where you have name-calling factions and people calling Theravada Hinayana, which means the lesser vehicle, and Mahayana is the greater vehicle, and there's all this sort of doctrinal squabbling. But the fact is that the Buddha Dharma, the basic teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, as well as the basic teachings of the Pali Canon, which also predates, of course, the Mahayana movement, are accepted by Mahayana. It's the same. It's the same. It's the same tradition with a couple of other things sort of added on, and so we'll talk about those. But these are just logical sort of extensions. Again, it's sort of you have this as the narrative that I favor here is that you have this sort of very conservative karmic Brahmanic tradition in Hinduism, and you have a kind of Protestant outbreak with Buddhism, where it insists that there can be movement on the Bodhi path in one lifetime. And one of then the philosophical projects that emerges from that is the project of looking at the self, which starts with Buddha himself. Part of the original teachings of the Buddha is the teaching of the 5 aggregates of self, which I won't go into right now. But as the name of the list implies, there are various different things, and they all come together, and we call it the self. And we've already, of course, been over quite a bit the way that the ego self, the self in the samsara realm, sort of arises through the 12-point cycle of dependent arising, the wheel of karma. So, okay. So then what you have with Mahayana is a kind of logical conclusion where if the problem was this self, this karmic self that was stuck on this wheel for hundreds of lifetimes and thousands of years, then the natural logical progression of Buddhist thought is the erasure of that self completely. To say that self really doesn't exist at all. It's completely not a real thing. And in which case, then no one was ever really on the wheel of karma in the first place, if only they had the conceptual tools to get off of it. So that's the logical progression. I mean, you get to the erasure of the self, really, and with Nagarjuna, sort of the erasure of the numerically distinct object, if you will. I mean, so it's pretty total. Okay, so let's go back to what we were looking at. There we go. Okay, so you got that. So then what are these Mahayana teachings? As I just sort of outlined to you, this basic notion that now we're going to have a doctrine where the self is completely illusory in the first place. But that leads to other things, such as the interdependent nature of all things, or oneness. It's sort of the difference between the one and the many in an interesting way. So that ego world, samsara, is the world of the many, but there's an underlying truth about the universe, that it is a unity, that it is one thing. And in fact, that nothing in it would exist without all the rest of it, that any momentary state of the universe, any time slice of the universe, if you will, at any point in time, the event, which is the universe, is going to be completely interdependent. That is to say, again, everything in it only makes sense and could only exist within the exact context of everything else in the universe being exactly that way. So then the spiritual and social teaching is, again, one of unity rather than individuality. Very, very basic Asian thinking that way. So that notion that nothing is an independent, sort of freestanding thing, as it would say in the Wisdom Sutra, that it has own being, right? So the idea is, say some object, a person, an animal, an artifact, a chair, or an object like a rock, and imagine it out in an empty void without anything else there. But really, everything about that thing that exists is something about its complete interrelationship with everything else in the universe. And so you can try to do that mental exercise of conceiving of the thing independently. But then the claim here, the Mahayana claim, is that's part of how we get into this world of dukkha and samsara, is by seeing things as individual things. So again, notice the critique of the self has now developed into a more general metaphysical and even cosmological view. And so emptiness not meaning nothingness, emptiness meaning void, which again is not nothingness, it's something else, it's void or emptiness. And somehow that is the expression of interdependence. That is, maximal interdependence is expressed here with the idea of emptiness, that fundamental being is emptiness. I'm not claiming to understand it, but it's very difficult. Vijnanavada, in more broader South Asian studies, you would hear about Yogacara. In Mahayana, we might just use the Sanskrit Vijnanavada. So here's just another thing. Notice it's all interconnected. None of this stuff is just coming out of nowhere. Look at the first bullet point, and then the second bullet point, and then the third. They're all completely systematic. If you think that there is no ego self, there isn't anything like that, then you have the question of, well, you have these concepts of consciousness, of self, of perception, of experience. And so what are those about exactly, now that we've got rid of anything like a sort of freestanding, if I would say, Cartesian, right, in the European tradition self? That's not there. One of the hardest things about understanding Asian philosophy, and I think Buddhist philosophy in particular, is the absence of the mind-body distinction, which is really baked in for Western people. So here's another, this is a dogmatic contribution of the Mahayana movement that is actually really important. So as I say, you sort of start with this idea of classical Brahmanic Vedic Hinduism, that the soul is on this wheel of karma for millennia as it slowly crawls its way up and down or down the scale of being. And then so the arhat, right, would be someone who had attained enlightenment and in this world. And there was such a concept in Hinduism of the arhat. In Buddhism, the arhat will often mean the person, the self-taught person who got enlightened by themselves. But in Hinduism, it's a much broader term for the enlightened person. But getting yourself off the wheel of karma, what, you got yourself off the wheel of karma, and then you just walk away. You just walk away from the great wheel of karma, spinning and turning with the cries of the millions of souls, screeching and wailing and sobbing behind you as you simply walk away from them all. But then that seems pretty self-interested, doesn't it? So if you were maximally enlightened, then you wouldn't be self-interested at all. You would be a completely altruistic being, a being, as another philosopher says, who was overflowing with their gift-giving virtue. That's what would become of you. And that's the Buddha. So the Buddha who has loving kindness and compassion for all living things. So what does the Buddha do then? Well, the Buddha decides that they have to go back into the realm of samsara, into the world of dukkha. Until when? Until all sentient beings are liberated from their suffering, until the suffering of all sentient beings in the universe comes to an end. That's the idea. And that's the true Buddha nature. That's what the true Buddha does. So we have these sutras. We have, again, notice we have the original Buddha Dharma, and then we have the Pali Canon, the Tripitaka, and now we have another body of literature coming to us a couple hundred years after the Pali Canon and much to the north. And these are what we know as the sutras. So there are many other things called sutras because, as I say, sutra is just the name of a text of some sort. Between the 1st and 3rd centuries, Prajnaparamita, the wisdom literature or the perfection of wisdom literature, and often presented as the word of the Buddha himself, much as in the King James Bible, say you might have red ink or gold ink for words purported to be the quotations from Jesus Christ. You have there's two big ones. There's many of them, but there is the Diamond Sutra or the Wisdom Sutra, which is a very, very long treatise, many, many hundreds of pages long. I read the English translation is like 800 pages long or something. I have a copy of it around here somewhere. But then you have the Heart Sutra, and the Heart Sutra is a compression. The thing that amazes me about the Heart Sutra, we're going to go over it now, um, is that this was something that was memorized by children and recited by families, you know. And the reason why I think that's astounding is not because of any disagreement with the doctrines expressed in it, they are, but the doctrines expressed are highly abstract. I mean, it's just hard to believe that this was considered to be homely wisdom by communities of people, and yet it was the Heart Sutra. So that's what we're going to look at right now. So this is just it, not in its entirety, but just about in its entirety. At the end, there's some stuff about, so the Bodhi is going to be like this, but basically this is the body of the Heart Sutra, these next 3 slides. Body is nothing more than emptiness. Emptiness is nothing more than body. Again, emptiness as fundamental being. That's why I keep using that word metaphysics. What is everything really? And you get this very paradoxical notion from the Mahayana Sutras and from Nagarjuna that fundamental being is emptiness. The body is exactly emptiness, and emptiness is exactly body. There are, we can do some things with it. Here's a little thing to do with it. Think of an empty space as, think of a window as having an empty space, or a doorway as having an empty space. Think of a bowl as having an empty space. And so what are these empty spaces? Well, these empty spaces are the power of those things. The bowl and the door work but through their empty space. Okay, fine, sure. But then notice it looks like consciousness also is an empty space. In the same way the bowl works by putting things into the bowl, the consciousness is an empty space that has thoughts and feelings in it. So how are you using, what are you doing with your empty space? Feeling, thought, will, and consciousness. So you see the transcendence of the self. And so in a classical spiritual tradition, that would involve humility and renunciation of ego, and that is definitely one of the things that's going on here. But notice also with these Buddhist teachings, you have the idea that if you realize that you are not your thoughts and feelings, then an empty space of possibility and power opens up for you. Okay. All things are empty, nothing's born, nothing dies, nothing's pure, nothing is stained, nothing increases, nothing decreases. Let me, though, just point out that a lot of people who will have just a little taste of Buddhism will tell you that what the teaching is that everything is an illusion and nothing is real. I even knew some people who thought they were Buddhists who thought that since everything was an illusion, it was okay for them to get drunk all the time and otherwise misbehave. But that's not it. It's not saying that, well, what would it mean to say that nothing is real and then what? I mean, no, that's not it. It's talking when Mahayana Buddhism says that you are emptiness, that nothing is born, that nothing dies, they are stressing the interconnectedness of everything with everything. In emptiness, there's no body, no feeling, no thought, no will, no consciousness, no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. No seeing, no hearing, no smelling, no tasting, no touching, no imagining. Imagine memorizing. Imagine telling your 8-year-old to memorize that. Are you kidding? Somehow, so there's a cultural gap there because I can't imagine. But one thing to remember looking at this is that in the Sanskrit, and I'll give you a little taste of that right at the end, not that I could do Sanskrit, it's for chanting. It's for chanting, and it's got meter, it's got a rhythmic. And there's repetition. So when you just read it like this as normal as a normal verse, it seems, as I say, very abstract. No ignorance, no end to ignorance, no old age and death, no end to old age and death, and so on. No attainment of wisdom and no wisdom to attain, which again is trickier kind of claim than it looks. So that's the Heart Sutra, and as they say, it's easy to see a superficial misinterpretation that it's sort of a denial of reality in favor of what, I don't know. That would be some arch philosophical epistemological position, right? That, well, you don't really know anything, or something like that. But I think that's a real reductive picture of Buddhist teachings. Buddhist teachings are precisely that everything is maximally interconnected, such that you really see, that's the thing. You really only exist as a part of this whole universe. If you were understood maximally, whatever that means, what we would understand about you is the inevitability of you granting the state of everything else in the universe, because it's all one. And then there's an interesting subtext here of applying those kinds of ideas to the mind, but apply them to physical objects, apply them to your coffee mug, and then apply them to yourself, yeah, and see what happens. All right, so I guess that's pretty much, I think that's the last slide, is that right? I think it pretty much is. Slide. Yeah, slide. Oh no, there's more stuff. Yeah, good. I'm glad I checked. Right, I said I was going to show you this. This is, I'm not sure what script it is, but it might be Tibetan. Looking at the alliterations, the top, mid-mena, wa-mena, mid-se-me, right. I think that's Tibetan. The interesting thing about Tibetan script, and we're going to end with Tibet. I hope we have time to do a couple things on Tibet. Tibet was actually socially engineered by cooperating Indian and Chinese royal families into Buddhism in order to sort of tame it. And the Tibetan script, the written Tibetan language, was actually developed and invented at the time in order that the Tibetans would be able to read the Buddhist literature. And here you can see this is the Heart Sutra: eye not, ear not, nose not, tongue not, body not, mind not, shape not, sound not, color not, flavor not, tangibility not. Dharma not is, I guess that's Yoda, right? Dharma not is. So you see the negation, right? Something about negation. And we see negation as a really important concept in European philosophy too, in dialectics and existentialism and all that. And here again, it's just the Heart Sutra. You see the wheel of karma, the 8, that's the positive one, the 8 spoke wheel, the 8-fold path, the 4th noble truth of the Buddha Dharma, and more of this script. And I do believe that is, yes, that's the last slide. Alrighty then. So I'm going to do another one on Nagarjuna, which is, as I say, people identify him very closely with this. But this is a good thing to know in terms of sort of what I would consider right speech about things. I don't think there's really any qualitative difference necessarily between the Mahayana and the Theravada Buddhism. They both accept the same basic teachings, so there isn't really any real philosophical difference between them. Although, as I've gone over today, there are interesting and cool things to look at in terms of what Mahayana Buddhism says. But it's wrong to say that one of them's better than the other, or even that they're really all that different. And then the other thing that I would repeat here is that notion of the Buddha going back down into the world of dukkha, the world of samsara, until all sentient beings in the universe are liberated. Okay, so and other things. So some cool links on that. And so now we're looking at, notice now we're really looking at some philosophical ideas, cosmological ideas about sort of the way that the universe is, and about the mind. And we see a challenging thing here too, that we don't have that framework of the metaphysical distinction between the mind and the body, between the soul and the body, that's characteristic of European philosophy. And it's very challenging. It's because it's baked in really deep. So it's really hard to get out of that box sometimes. And that's one of the things that's actually fun about studying Buddhist philosophy, is it doesn't recognize that inner outer mind body distinction. Alrighty then. So that's good. I shall see you in my meditations.